productive day, and we're going to start a meeting with the president, who we all know very well. He's a brave man, and he's putting up one hell of a fight, and we'll see how that all turns out. But we're going to have a meeting, and we have about 30 meetings scheduled today. We have a lot of meetings scheduled today, going pretty late into the night. But this is an important one, and
Following his address at the United Nations General Assembly today, President Donald Trump held a meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in New York, where the two leaders sat side by side before cameras and spoke at length with reporters about the ongoing war in Ukraine, the future of NATO involvement, and the wider implications for European security. The gathering, which took place only hours after Trump's fiery address at the UN, quickly turned into one of the most closely watched moments of the day as reporters pressed the former president on his views regarding NATO responsibilities, the limits of Western patience, and the possible escalation of tensions with Russia. Trump began his remarks by once again stressing that the United States has borne what he described as a disproportionate burden in maintaining European security. He noted that NATO is a collective alliance that requires unity not just in words but in decisive actions, and he turned to the subject of Russian aircraft straying into the airspace of NATO member countries. With his trademark bluntness, Trump declared that NATO nations should not hesitate to defend their skies, and that if Russian jets enter the airspace of any NATO member, those planes should be immediately shot down. His words reverberated across the press room, drawing both gasps and hurried scribbles from reporters who understood the potential consequences of such a statement. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky sat beside Trump, listening carefully. Zelensky, who has become a symbol of resistance since the invasion of his country began in 2022, nodded at points but also appeared cautious. He spoke afterward, thanking the United States for its consistent support and urging that the collective will of NATO and Western allies must not falter. Zelensky emphasized that deterrence works only when threats are met with credible actions, and he said that Ukraine continues to stand on the front lines of defending not just its own sovereignty but the principles of international law and democracy. Trump continued by reiterating that deterrence requires clarity. He argued that ambiguity only encourages Russian adventurism. He recounted instances from past conflicts when hesitation on the part of Western powers emboldened aggressors, and he made clear that in his view the only way to prevent wider war is to establish firm red lines that Moscow cannot ignore. Reporters asked him whether such a policy might risk escalating the war into a direct NATO-Russia confrontation. Trump countered that the opposite is true, and that weakness and hesitation are far more dangerous than decisive responses. He stated bluntly that the Kremlin understands strength but takes advantage of division. As the press event stretched on, Trump's language at times mirrored his earlier United Nations address, where he had spoken about the need for a renewed spirit of fairness within NATO contributions. He repeated his familiar criticism that too many European countries rely on the American taxpayer to shoulder defense costs, but he quickly shifted back to the immediate crisis in Ukraine, reminding everyone that Russian aggression must be met with more than sanctions and rhetoric. Trump said sanctions have their place but cannot stop missiles from flying or soldiers from advancing. He pressed that it is action in the air and on the ground that matters. Zelensky was asked by reporters whether he agreed with Trump's sharp prescription and whether such a policy might bring catastrophic escalation. Zelensky responded by noting that escalation is already a daily reality in Ukraine, where Russian aircraft drop bombs on civilian infrastructure and missiles strike cities. He said Ukrainians live with escalation every day, and that the question is not whether the war escalates but whether Russia is stopped. He stressed that if NATO territory is violated, it is not simply Ukraine's fight but the collective responsibility of all members to protect their sovereignty. The meeting between Trump and Zelensky came against the backdrop of ongoing debates within NATO capitals about how far the alliance should go in directly confronting Russian military power. While many NATO states have provided weapons, intelligence, and training for Ukrainian forces, the alliance has so far been careful to avoid direct engagement with Russian aircraft or forces. Trump's words therefore carried significant weight because they openly challenge the cautious approach that has been in place since the start of the war. His insistence that Russian jets entering NATO airspace should be shot down is not new to military doctrine, but the force and clarity with which he delivered it suggested a far more confrontational stance. Reporters pressed Trump further, asking if he believed the current U.S. administration was doing enough. He responded by saying that hesitation and mixed messages have weakened the deterrent power of NATO. He accused current leaders of worrying more about political optics than about saving lives, and he called for an immediate review of NATO's rules of engagement regarding Russian incursions. He claimed that if the alliance fails to defend its airspace with force, Russia will push boundaries further and further until an even larger conflict becomes unavoidable. As the conversation unfolded, Zelensky took care to balance his gratitude with his own appeals for more aid. He said Ukraine has received extraordinary help, but the war is grinding on and resources are not limitless. He painted a stark picture of what continued Russian bombardment means for civilians, schools, hospitals, and energy facilities. He also said that Ukraine cannot hold out indefinitely if Western powers hesitate or send mixed messages to Moscow. He reminded everyone present that this war has implications far beyond Ukraine's borders and that Russia is testing not just one country but the entire democratic world. Trump at several moments drew on historical analogies referencing the appeasement of aggressors in the 1930s. He said that history shows again and again that dictators only stop when confronted with overwhelming force. He argued that while nuclear escalation is always a concern, the far greater danger is showing weakness to a regime that thrives on pushing limits. His comments were clearly aimed at reassuring skeptics that deterrence by strength is a path toward preventing rather than provoking wider war. Throughout the event, the dynamic between the two leaders was notable. Zelensky presented the case of a wartime president fighting for survival, appealing for clarity, unity, and sustained support. Trump positioned himself as a leader who could bring decisive clarity where he says others have dithered. Their combined presence projected both urgency and tension as they addressed reporters for nearly an hour. Reporters asked Trump whether he envisioned the United States expanding its direct military involvement. He sidestepped any suggestion of American boots on the ground, instead emphasizing NATO collective responsibility. He said that NATO's strength lies in its unity and that if a Russian aircraft violates a NATO border, the response should be immediate, collective, and forceful. He described this as the price of membership in the alliance and suggested that any country unwilling to take such steps should reconsider its commitments. As questions turned to the humanitarian toll, Zelensky described harrowing scenes from Ukraine, noting that the war has already displaced millions, destroyed entire communities, and left countless families grieving. He stressed that humanitarian appeals must go hand in hand with stronger military action to stop the attacks in the first place. Trump echoed that sentiment in his own way, saying that the surest path to peace is strength and that humanitarian aid is most effective when paired with clear deterrence that stops further violence before it happens. The remarks are already rippling through international capitals. Diplomats and defense analysts are parsing Trump's statement about shooting down Russian aircraft. Some see it as a bold reaffirmation of NATO principles. Others warn that it could escalate tensions to an uncontrollable level. Yet for Trump, the message appeared simple: NATO must be willing to use force to defend its airspace, or it risks being seen as an empty shell. His words will likely dominate discussions in Brussels and other capitals in the days ahead. As the event closed, Trump shook Zelensky's hand and the two leaders offered brief closing remarks. Trump said he believes Ukraine has shown extraordinary courage and resilience and that it deserves unwavering support. Zelensky responded by thanking the American people for standing with Ukraine and said that the sacrifices being made on the battlefield are for the freedom and security of all democratic nations. The meeting underscored the sharp stakes facing NATO as the war in Ukraine continues with no clear end in sight. Trump's comments placed renewed attention on the alliance's red lines and how they are enforced. Zelensky's appeals highlighted the human cost of delay and hesitation. Together, their joint appearance signaled both unity of purpose and the unresolved questions of how far Western powers are prepared to go in confronting Russia directly. Observers note that the timing of the meeting immediately following Trump's United Nations address was no coincidence. It allowed him to amplify his message about fairness in NATO contributions and then pivot to a more urgent and concrete proposal about defending airspace. It also allowed Zelensky to reinforce Ukraine's plea for clarity and strength in support of its struggle against Russian aggression. The choreography of the day ensured maximum global attention, and the exchanges between the two leaders are likely to remain a focal point of debate for weeks. For many watching around the world, the images of Trump and Zelensky together served as a reminder that while speeches at the UN can be symbolic, the real tests of leadership come in moments of blunt clarity, when decisions about war, peace, and deterrence are laid bare. Trump's insistence that NATO must be ready to shoot down Russian aircraft if they cross into Allied skies may be remembered as one of those moments that defines the course of debate going forward. Whether it becomes actual policy or remains a point of contention will depend on the choices of NATO governments in the weeks and months to come. The press event ultimately left no doubt about Trump's stance: his belief in deterrence through strength, his skepticism about half measures, and his conviction that NATO cannot afford ambiguity. Zelensky's presence reinforced the urgency of the moment, reminding everyone that behind the strategic debates lies the brutal reality of war unfolding daily in Ukraine. As the two men departed the hall, the weight of their words lingered, leaving allies, adversaries, and observers alike to grapple with the possibility that the line between confrontation and escalation may be tested sooner rather than later.